Newsmakers, actor Kevin Sorbo, a prime minister's faith and surviving the election. That and more coming up. Welcome to Newsmakers, a show where we go behind the headlines each and every week to bring you interviews with pastors, entertainers, politicians, and other notable news figures. On today's Newsmakers, actor Kevin Sorbo joins the show to share his journey to faith, how he ended up in Hollywood, and why he stands firm in his convictions. Let's welcome Kevin Sorbo to Newsmakers. So Kevin Sorbo, people know you from all sorts of projects, Hercules, God's Not Dead, Down the Line, Let There Be Light. But let's kind of go back to the beginning. How did you make your way into Hollywood?
On a hope and a prayer. I grew up in a little town in Minnesota, about 20 miles outside of Minneapolis, beautiful Lake Minnetonka, my little town called Mound. We were home to Tonka Toys. There's a trivia question, Lake Minnetonka, Tonka Toys. And it was fifth grade, we took a field trip to the Guthrie Theater. So people in the theater world know of the Guthrie Theater. It started by Arlo Guthrie, a British actor, decades ago. And a lot of plays start there before they moved to Broadway, Lion King being one of them. And so we went to a field trip to go see The Merchant of Venice. It was Shakespeare. I was 11. I don't know what the hell they were saying. It was Shakespeare. But I was blown away by the actors on stage. And I told my mom, who was one of the chaperones on the way home, was sitting next to her on the bus, and she said, "So what do you think?" I said, "I'm going to be an actor." And she went, the mom pat on the leg, "That's nice, dear." And but it was there, the seed had been planted. At birth, my parents were very devoted Christians. My mom's still alive at 92. My father passed 12 years ago. My best friend, he was the best man at my wedding, my dad. I miss him every day. They had St. John's Lutheran Church, typical Norwegian kid. I'm second generation from Norway. I go to the Lutheran church. I always laughed at them because they said, "Why would you leave Norway, my great-grandparents, and move to a place in America that's just as cold?" You couldn't settle down a little in Florida. But it was always there for me, always there for me. And our main pastor, Pastor Sanders, scared the hell out of me. I mean, this guy was fire and brimstone, breathing's a sin. I mean, this guy was scared of him. And it wasn't until Pastor Lee came along. Everything with him, we had a place called The Room. The room was, it was two classes separated by a curtain. They would open it up. We had all beat up old couches and, chairs and stuff. And it was all for the teenagers. It was all for 13 to 17-year-olds of the church. And Wednesday nights was The Room, starting at 8 o'clock, 8 to 10. And we'd hang out. He would tell stories, but he'd bring the Bible into our current world. It wasn't like, let's go back to that. And, but he would bring those stories into how it affects us in today's world. And he was just really cool. And when I was 13, we took a field trip to the St. Paul Fairgrounds with the Reverend Billy Graham. And I told this story in the Larry King Show, by the way. And I said, it was a hot August night. There was like 300,000 people there outside. It was amazing. Full moon was out. And Billy Graham was like incredible, even though he was a mile away on the stage, the big screen set up. And I did something I normally wouldn't do. And he said, at the end, I got people up here if you want to come up and, talk, pray, whatever. And I went up. I remember my buddy Jeff goes, "Where are you going?" I said, I got to go up. I don't know why. Sat down in the grass with this guy. He was like 35, so he's like a really old guy to me, 13 years old. And we were sitting there talking. And all of a sudden a hand goes on my head, and I turned around, and it was Billy Graham. And he had his security guys with him, of course. But his head was perfectly behind the full moon. So like, these rays coming out of his head. And I get goosebumps telling it. It was just, and I told that story, and I had a call from Larry Ross. I think you know Larry.
Yes, yeah.
And he runs a lot of the stuff for Billy Graham. And Larry said, "Hey, we saw the story. They're doing 100 Chicken Soup for the Soul. 101 stories of people have been affected by Pastor."
Did you feel a pull away from faith? Coming into Hollywood, how did you balance that?
I never really felt a pull away from faith in Hollywood. I knew that where the industry is and the secularism of it and stuff like that, but I never, if conversation came up on the set, I was never one to back down from it, whether it's political or whether it's religious, didn't matter to me. But back then, you didn't get the kickback you're getting back today, which is just crazy. The hate that comes out now in the world. And it just shows you how far we've just fallen, I think, as human beings. It's amazing to me because I don't harbor that kind of anger and hate to someone who has a different political point of view or different religious point of view.
Do you feel though, for yourself,
yeah,
because you were always open about it.
Sure.
now being open about it today, you're saying it's different. Do you feel it impacted you?
Oh, no question, impacted me. I mean, my agent and manager called me in about 10, 12 years ago, and I felt like it was an intervention. They said, we can't work with you anymore. And I said, why? Well, the stuff you're putting on Facebook. I go, what do you mean stuff? I'm not putting any hate out there. Yeah, but you got people in this industry that don't like Christians. They don't like it. In fact, if you're conservative, as apparently both those things are like you're a double leper in Hollywood. So I thought that was just kind of interesting, and I said, fine. I should have been angry about it, but I went, okay. And that's when my wife and I said, let's just form Sorbo Studios. Let's try to hopefully raise our own money for our own movies. And it's just snowballed now for me, where a lot of other independent people come to me that are, maybe you can say, like-minded, I guess. But I've really, the last 10 years, 11 years, mostly family-friendly. Doesn't have to be faith-based. But it's got to have good morals. I mean, if I look at Hercules, here's a mythological show that the writers put in really good moral values for a mythology, not biblical type show. And that came through the letters we got from kids. I mean, by season 3, we were in 176 countries, the most watched TV show in the world. We had 1,000+ letters a week coming in down to New Zealand where I was filming. And the things you get from kids saying, I'm stopped being a bully because of your show. Or I like the fact that I can talk my way out of trouble. I don't have to look for trouble. I mean, it's amazing. Every movie I've been doing since the Hercules years, especially in the last 15 years, I get a stunt guy. Hey, I became a stunt guy because of you. Hey, I worked out because of you. I wanted, and it's just amazing to me. And it shows you, like Walt Disney said back in the 50s, movies and television will influence our youth. I think Walt isn't happy what Disney's doing right now, because he's completely right in that. Because it can be used for good, it can be used for evil. Just like the internet. The internet's the Wild West. And it's crazy what's out there, but there are wonderful things about technology as well. I'm not going to knock that. But unfortunately, in today's world, there's a lot of unhappiness, a lot of unhappy people. And they only get their happiness attacking you or attacking me. And that's unfortunate.
Well, I love that. And what a legacy, right? That your career's taken this direction and you're inspiring people in this way. Appreciate you joining us today.
My pleasure. It's good to see you again.
Let's be sure to continue praying for Sorbo and other Christians like him who are trying to spread light amid the darkness in Hollywood. We'll be right back with more Newsmakers in just a moment. Welcome back to Newsmakers. Next up, we're welcoming Scott Morrison, the former Prime Minister of Australia. Now, he is an outspoken Christian who is here to share his faith and to also talk about his new book. It's titled Plans for Your Good, a Prime Minister's Testimony of God's Faithfulness. Let's welcome him here to Newsmakers. So we have much to talk about today. Your new book, Plans for Your Good, a Prime Minister's Testimony of God's Faithfulness. I have a number of questions for you about life and leadership, but what was it that led you to want to write this book?
No, not politics, that's for sure. It's not a political memoir. I have no interest in that. Politicians tend to write books about themselves and what they did. And of course, there's a lot of personal experience in this, but it's more a book about what I believe God's done for me. So it was really, as the subtitle says, it's a testimony. This is my testimony. This is where I believe God has been faithful to me over the course of my life. And that took me into the highest political office in Australia, and dealing with those who headed up governments around the world at probably the most challenging time we've seen since the Second World War, certainly in Australia. Pandemics, bushfires, droughts, floods, rising China, regional tensions. It was a bit of a perfect storm there over the almost 4 years I was Prime Minister. But God was faithful in that, as he was in my family life and in so many other ways. And that's what I try to tell the story of and encourage people in their own faith.
Yeah, I mean, no matter where people are, they need encouragement, right? Life is challenging and difficult, although the position you were in, as you mentioned at the time you were in, incredibly tough things happening in the world, in your country. I want to get into that, but what was your journey to faith? When did you become a Christian? I'd love to kind of dig into that a little bit.
Sure. When I was a boy, I was 12 years old. I grew up in a Christian family, a beautiful Christian family, with parents who not only had a deep faith but a very practical faith. They understood that, as a follower of Jesus, that means you did things. You served your community. You served in the church. And so I grew up in that environment. I learned that life was not about what you accumulate, but what you contribute, and not just in a sort of a ministry sense, but in your community. And so that sort of led me ultimately into public life. My brother became a paramedic. So, you know, that idea of service is something that we held very highly, and it was inspired very much by our faith. So, you know, I gave my life to the Lord as a young boy of 12, and I've been walking with him for, well over 40 years now. And the walk is always fresh and it's always new.
Yeah. Politics is a tough business. I mean, how did you balance always your faith and that intense belief that you had with the role, which encompassed so many different things, I would imagine, and even issues maybe that didn't align with your faith, but that you had to find a position on?
Yeah, I think the answer to that is on my knees. That's how I did so. Praying for wisdom and discernment and judgment, for humility, and just trying to find that sensible path. Because you're absolutely right. I mean, when you're a Christian in politics, you're not letting some theocracy. You haven't been elected as the Australian Pope or something. You are Australia's Prime Minister, and you must serve everybody, and you must respect all of their interests and views, and including those that aren't the same as yours, and faith positions that aren't the same as yours. You know, we celebrate our democracy, and a Prime Minister who is a person of faith must do that. And I think it's a great sort of testimony of Christian faith to do that. Just as the founding fathers in the United States, wrote it into the Constitution, freedom of religion. That was freedom to have one or not have one, because God doesn't need the government to prove his case or impose it on anybody. I'm sure God's quite capable of witnessing through his church. So finding that and understanding what the role was, but also a lot like Daniel, who I looked to a lot when I was Prime Minister in particular and when I was in politics. Here's Daniel serving Nebuchadnezzar, a secular king with other idols and with other objectives and beliefs to him. But Daniel served as a faithful Prime Minister to Nebuchadnezzar and those that followed him. He spoke the truth. He held his ground. When they told him he couldn't practice his faith or pray, he refused. They threw him in a lion's den. The lions were kept silent. And I think that's how you do it. You just have to be consistent about who you are and not shy about it.
Yeah. And it kind of brings me to this book because, I love the title, Plans for Your Good, a Prime Minister's Testimony of God's Faithfulness. At the end of the day, when somebody picks this book up and they read it, what do you want the impact to be on their lives?
Ultimately, I want them to understand a couple of things. But my testimony is, if you can't trust God with everything, you can't trust him with anything. If you want what God wants for you, you've got to allow him to do that. You've got to put aside what you think you want for you. And that is hard. It's a wrestle. It's difficult. I write in the book about Philippians 4, 6, and 7, be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication, make your requests known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will keep your hearts and minds in Jesus. That's hard. That's, to do that, be anxious for nothing? Seriously? I mean, there's plenty to be anxious about. And I say that Paul is saying, it's not that you, as a human being, wouldn't get anxious. Of course you will. He's not denying that. But he's saying to hand over your anxieties to God, to hand over your plans and your ambitions for yourself, and to hand them over to him, to lay them down. That's the Christian life, and allowing God to work through you. And, we can't treat our faith as a vending machine. The other thing I try and say in the book is, look, I found God in the highest of achievements and the greatest moments of despair. And I was blessed in both. The blessing is not the stuff. It's not the thing. It's his presence. And that's what encourages us. That's what makes us look to tomorrow. I mean, when Stephen was stoned, things for those looking in would say, well, that's not going terribly well for him at this moment in time. But there he was, sitting Jesus at the right hand of the Father, welcoming him. And prior to that, his face was beaming like the sun. So, you sort of want a bit of what Stephen's got there.
Yeah. The book is Plans for Your Good, a Prime Minister's Testimony of God's Faithfulness. It was really great talking with you today. Appreciate your time.
Well, look, I really appreciate the chat, and God bless everyone. And if you get a copy, great. And I hope it encourages you. That's why I wrote it. I don't really consider myself an author. I just consider myself as someone who had the privilege to serve in a role, and that gives me the opportunity to share my faith, and then I will. So thank you very much, and God bless.
I love that. God bless. Thank you so much. You can grab your copy of Plans for Your Good, a Prime Minister's testimony of God's faithfulness wherever books are sold. This is Newsmakers on the CBN News Channel. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Newsmakers on the CBN News Channel. For our final segment, we sat down with pastor and author Joshua Ryan Butler, who joins the show to discuss his new book, The Party Crasher: How Jesus Disrupts Politics as Usual and Redeems Our Partisan Divide. It's certainly a title we need right now. Let's welcome Joshua to Newsmakers. So the book title here, The Party Crasher: How Jesus Disrupts Politics as Usual and Redeems Our Partisan Divide. Right. Gosh, you really chose a fiery topic during a fiery season, didn't you?
Yeah, very lighthearted topic. Nothing controversial here.
nothing controversial. But let's start. We're going to get into the book, but what drives you the most crazy or concerns you, because I don't want to put words in your mouth, about how some Christians today handle politics?
Definitely. Well, so a little background. So I've been a pastor for a little over 20 years, and the last two election seasons, just seeing the fracturing and division where we all feel it. The political divide is wider than ever, but seeing it fracture families and friendships and even churches. So I share a story in the opening of the book of just a church we were really close with, good friends with, and our network. And they split in half, like 1,500 out of 3,000 people left. And over what seemed to me relatively small, it was one of the pastors put a video on Instagram, kind of, trying to offer some thoughts, shepherd spiel that seemed pretty tame from where I was at, but for about 8 people in the church, they kind of read it through a particular grid and basically left the church angry and started a campaign to take down the church. We're unwilling to meet to kind of process through things. So they started coffee shop conversations with friends like, oh, this is why this church is going the wrong way. They started gossip and slander, just rumors that were flat out not true about where this church was sending their money and all. And basically, though, where they started scouring every pastor in the network, all of our sermons looking for ammunition, and then every pastor and their spouse's social media feeds just looking for anything to take down on the church. And it worked. So much of what the rumors that spread and gossip and whatever was just not true. But within a few months, like 1,500 out of 3,000 people left angry, and it kind of split the church, and that kind of stuff made me upset. That drove me, that kind of thing drives me crazy. And I wish I could say that was just a one-off story, but being friends with people, pastors around the nation, knowing that is actually happened a lot. I was just talking last week with a friend who's a pastor here in Portland. That story was in Arizona, but here in Portland, where the same thing happened back during the last election season. So the heart behind the book was, man, that kind of thing drives me crazy. And we're seeing it fracture families, again, and friendships as well. And so wanting to try to offer some resources and things that I found helpful and our church used that was really helpful to go, how do we navigate the political season, this election season, without necessarily, letting it divide us in those unhealthy kind of ways.
So let me ask you this. How is politics today mirroring religion, and even for some people, potentially replacing it or taking a higher precedence over it?
Totally. So I talk in the first chapter about what I call the 4 political religions. And big idea here, we often think left-right, right? And that's true. But I argue that there's also a top-down axis of modernity to post-modernity that is kind of split what we think of as the traditional left and right. And so on the upper left, if you can kind of think of these as 4 quadrants, right? So top, left-right axis and a top-down axis. And if we go to the upper left, kind of start there, which is the modern left, I call this the religion of progress, with a creed of we can change the world. The modern right, as I call it, is the religion of responsibility, where here the creed is pull yourself up by your bootstraps. We can think here of this religion being more prominent in the suburbs and Wall Street, where there's a strong faith in personal potential and hard work and good moral values and taking responsibility for yourself and those closest to you, the free market, business entrepreneurship. And when I was growing up, those seemed to be the 2 predominant options. But now if we move to the lower quadrants, the postmodern quadrants, it might be helpful for me to first say, okay, what do I mean by modernity to postmodernity? Postmodernity is a reactionary movement against modernity that saw a lot of modernity's failures. We see things like world wars and nuclear weapons. We see evil things like eugenics that were done in the name of science and progress. So how does this play out in the political religions, right? Okay, well, the lower left quadrant, this would be like the postmodern left, I refer to as the religion of identity, where here the creed is live your truth. Like, don't anybody tell you how to live your life, like you do you. And what makes this quadrant postmodern is it's very pessimistic towards the ideas and institutions of modernity. Like, it still wants to change the world like the upper left, but it no longer trusts those institutions and science things to get us there. And so now there's an emphasis on looking within and discovering and expressing one's most authentic desires. But if we go into the lower right quadrant, I call this the religion of security, where the creed here is good fences make good neighbors. And there's a sense here in this quadrant of like, we live in a dangerous world. We need boundaries, borders to keep people safe. Security allows us to prosper. Insiders in this quadrant, we share codes of conduct with rules of behavior for how we live together. And we should display thick bonds of loyalty to insiders, those who are with us. And we should be wary of outsiders who can threaten our way of life. And my claim is, Jesus doesn't belong to one of those four quadrants. Those four values belong to Jesus. He is the Lord of all of life. He is the Lord who holds together all those things and calls us into a countercultural presence that can take bold stands, but is not conformed or confined to some of the partisan boxes of our day.
The book is The Party Crasher, How Jesus Disrupts Politics as Usual and Redeems Our Partisan Divide. Appreciate you taking the time and joining us today.
Thanks, Billy. Love the conversation. Appreciate it, man. Thank you.
You can grab The Party Crasher wherever books are sold. We'll be right back in just a moment with more Newsmakers. That's all for Newsmakers. Thank you for watching, and be sure to head on over to the CBN News YouTube channel. That's where you will find the full interviews that you saw on today's episode. Plus, you can check out our new daily Newsmakers podcast. We feature one full interview every single day. Be sure to head on over and subscribe on your favorite podcast platforms. As for this show, we will see you again here.